Hi, it's Brita Fletcher coming to you from my kitchen and from Ponderosa FFA Floral. And today I'm going to be teaching you how to make a classic boutonniere and then talking about some methods to possibly make a more modern boutonniere. So today we are going to be working with the classic red rose. And we talked about this in earlier videos, if you've watched them, that these petals on the outside of the rose are called guard petals, and they are there to protect the bloom when it's in the bud stage. And so if they're damaged or bruised or ripped, you're going to go ahead and take those off. And then I like to take off these sepals, which also grew around this flower and protected it. And some people like to leave them, but when I'm teaching this for the first time to someone, it's easier to have those out of the way. It's really a personal preference as to whether you want to leave those on or not. Some people feel they make it look more natural to leave it on, so they'll leave those sepals on. But for today, I'm going to go ahead and take those off. And when you're buying roses, if you don't know, I just got these from a local grocery store because my wholesale order doesn't come in until Wednesday for my students. And so when you're buying roses, one of the ways to check for freshness is how firm is this part of the rose down here on the bottom. It should feel very firm. If it feels mushy or soft, that means that rose is becoming blown. It's blown open, it's more mature, and it's not going to last as long when you take it home. Sometimes you'll feel there and it'll feel like there's a marble inside of it, and that's a positive thing. That's what you want. Okay, of course you can always look at the leaves for indicators of whether that is a fresh rose or not as well. Our leaves tell us a lot about the age of the plants that we're buying. And so the materials that I'm using today may be a little different than what my students are taking home this week in their to-go boxes as we're practicing social distancing, but you'll be able to transfer the information that I give you even if you have some different materials. And so I'm going to go ahead and remove the stem off of this rose, and you want to leave about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of stem. You just snap that off, and we don't need this part anymore. And that's what you have now. And the reason why we take off the stem is because the stem adds bulk and weight. And when someone wears flowers, whether it's a corsage, it's a boutonniere, it's a flower crown, flowers to wear should eventually feel like wearing a piece of jewelry or a watch. The person should forget that they have those flowers on. They should be so light and easy to wear. And so if we leave that big rose stem on, it's going to add a lot of weight and bulk to our design. So we don't need that, and we're going to replace that with some floral wire. And then replacing it with floral wire allows us to manipulate the stem of it so that we can make the design do what we want, and it also lightens everything up. And that's our goal as we go along. Every time we add something, we're thinking about how much weight are we adding? How much bulk are we adding to this thing that eventually someone should just wear and forget that it's even there? And so we're making a boutonniere, which is typically worn by a man. Sometimes I have people who I'm going to cut my floral wire in half. It's about 18 inches long, and I think it's about 18 inches long. I'm going to cut that in half simply because we don't need a full piece of wire, so we can save some money by just using half. And then I'm going to insert that here into the receptacle of the flower. Okay, that's this bulbous part right here of the stem. And I'm going to put that in perpendicularly to the stem. So see how I can show you this the best. It's a 26 gauge wire, so it's not very thick. This is floral wire. It's just wire that is coated, and it's green in color, so it blends in better. So I'm going to pierce through that receptacle straight through. I'm going to pull that wire halfway through like that. Okay. And then I'm going to bend it down. So anyway, a boutonniere is typically worn by a man, and sometimes I have people call and say, I would like to order boutonnieres, but I would like to add a bow to them. Well, in my world, when you add a bow to a boutonniere, you've made it a corsage. You can add some kind of ribbon to it. You can ribbon wrap the stem when we're completely finished. You could make what I call a little flag, to put a flag of ribbon to add a little color to it. But once you put a bow on it, I think you've made it a corsage. Not everyone may agree, but those are the definitions that I use that differentiate between those two. So once we have that wired like that, if it's a really big, heavy-headed rose, you could do cross wiring, which means you do the same thing again. I can go ahead and do that. I'll show you. We don't always follow this step because now our varieties of roses have such strong heads through the beauty of science. And so we don't really always have to do this. Again, I just pierce through the receptacle perpendicular to the stem. I'm going to pull it halfway through, and then I'm going to bend that down. And so there I've even increased the structure that we're giving to this rose to hold that head up. So if you're dealing with a flower that has a very heavy head, that's one of the ways that you can keep it straight. In any case, after that, we're going to use our floral tape, and this comes in different colors. I always try to match the color of the tape. This is what it looks like. So this is a light green. I believe this one is an olive green. If you're one of my students, it's like packing presents for Christmas. I love it when I get to do this for you this week, when we're getting our to-go boxes ready. So some of you are going to get regular colored tape, and some of you are going to get some really exciting colors. And you're going to say to me, what were you doing? I didn't give you the orange, but I gave some of you the pink and some the gold and some the iridescent green. There are some exciting things in there. So I like to match the tape color to the color of the stems we're using and the greens we're using. That's a little darker, but in real life, those go together pretty well. So we're going to go ahead and tape over these wires because those are our mechanics and we don't want them to show. So floral tape sticks to itself, and this is a whole lesson in itself, how to tape. And we actually spend a couple days, maybe 3 or 4 days in class, learning how to use florist tape. And we practice on pens and make petal pens. So I'll give you a quick explanation of what I'm doing, but that might be something you need to look into if you want to learn to wire and tape. You might want to watch some other videos, or I'll make one, I guess, for wiring and taping. This rose is falling apart, but I can show you the basics here. So I looked up some wiring and taping videos, and what I knew and then found out again is that if you ask 10 people how to do this, you're going to get 10 different techniques. And the florist I actually looked up yesterday did this exactly opposite of what I'm going to show you right now. And so I think if you go to work for someone, they might show you exactly how they want it done. But it may also be one of those skills where if your end result works, then it's probably fine however you've chosen to do it. So floral tape sticks to itself. And I'll just show you quickly how this works. You have to stretch it a bit in order to get it to stick to itself. It doesn't have like a sticky adhesive side, but you do have to stretch it almost to activate it. And so I'm going to go around this rose one time to get it to stick to itself. And then I'm going to start angling that tape downward. So I hold the tape in my strong hand and angle it downward. Sorry. And then I am using my weak hand and my body temperature in my weak hand to press on that tape and get it to adhere to itself and to whatever I'm trying to tape. My dogs are excited. Someone just pulled up. And so I pull with this hand, and with this hand I pinch and warm. And our goal here is to use as little tape as possible. So again, if I did this 8 hours a day, I would be faster. It's incredible when you watch a florist who's worked for a long time or who does this for a living, how fast they can tape. And then as I'm coming down and I'm continuing to pull, then I'm going to spin with my offhand. You can see, this is why I didn't use this rose. And it's hopefully making a very thin line of tape as I'm going along. So I'm going to tape that nearly to the bottom, and then you just rip it off. You don't have to cut it. You can just rip it. And then I always take 2 fingers and strip this, which means I just pinch it and pull it. And then if I have any extra on the end, so see I have a little tiny bit of extra, then again, you can diminish that. But our goal is a very thin and smoothly taped wire. That's what we're trying for. All right, so at this point, I have my wired and taped rows. I've taken the bulk out. I can manipulate the stem where I want it to go. And so now I'm going to go ahead and tape in my other elements. So I have some green, and we always use green as a background. And so I'm going to put this green kind of like that in the back. I like to put filler in both the back and the front. Again, this starts to have to do with style. What do you like? What do you prefer? Some people like a lot of filler. Some people just like a little bit of filler. What is it that you're going for in this end product? We should talk a little bit about proportion as I get this together. I'm just holding it all together in my hands here. When we are making flowers to wear, our proportion has to do with where they will end up. And in this case, that has to do with the person who will eventually wear it. And so, for example, if you are making this boutonniere for a man who is over 6 feet tall and he's a large guy, then it should be a fairly large boutonniere when you're finished. If you're making it for the ring bearer in a wedding ceremony, and that little guy is only 3 years old, then you should not be making him a boutonniere this size of this rose. And one thing to remember in what you see me doing is that this is where it's going to end up. It's going to be pinned against someone's chest. And so the fact that right now this green is kind of flopping backwards is not an issue because of where it will eventually be. So if you're able to know the size of your recipient of your flowers to wear, that's what we use when we are talking about proportion. If you don't know the size, then you just have to determine what is your standard size of a boutonniere that you would typically make, and you go for it. If it's the groom, you should probably have an idea of what this man looks like because those pictures are going to last forever. So I'm pretty happy with the composition that I have set up here. We don't want layers. So we don't want like green in the back and then red and then white. That's not how nature works. Nature doesn't grow in rows like that. We want it a little more randomly spaced throughout, and we do want this to be the star of the show. You can see how high my green is behind it. It's truly a background. It's not way up here, and it's not tucked below where no one can see it. So now that I have all those stems together, I'm going to go to this point where they all join, and I'm going to use my tape again. I'm just going to go around a few times to secure it in place. So I have secured that where I want it to be. And at this point, again, we want to remove bulk. I don't want to cut this wire. I don't want to cut this wire that I initially put in. I need that later. That's my wire. But see these stems? I don't need them to come down this far. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use wire cutters because then I can just use one tool if I use those. And I'm going to cut some of this out. And it's kind of like if you think about cutting hair, if you cut it straight across, it's going to fall very thickly. If you cut it at various levels or layers, it's going to taper and it's going to be thinner. So I cut all those stems at different lengths. So I'm not making a bulky stem where I took out my previous bulky stem. And then I'm ready to finish this off. So I'm just going to pick up where I left off with my tape. I'm going to go around all these stems. And I'm going to keep taping until it is melded with the wire that I previously had. All right, so there's our basic boutonniere. And now we have to make some decisions because we have this long stem. We have to decide, what do we want to do with this long stem? And so one thing you can do, this is really just personal preference. So do you want to cut it straight and just make it look like it's growing like a regular stem? Or do you want to curl it? Give it a little twirl like a tendril on a grapevine. That's a very popular way to finish a boutonniere. And then, of course, we could cut it, we could ribbon wrap it, and then we could twirl it. And so you could put on bullion wire at this point, which is a super thin wire that's decorative, and you could make a little nest of that around. Like I said, you could put a flag. If you wanted to complement the white baby's breath here, you could put a white flag. In this case, I'm just going to show you the two most simple techniques to finish a boutonniere. One is to just cut this stem at an angle, hopefully in proportion to the composition that you have on the top. So what I mean by that is, that's a little too long. So I'm going to cut that. Oh, but I need it to show you the tendril. So we'll leave it that long this time, but you might cut that a little bit shorter if someone were to wear it like this. Let me see if I can get you a better shot. I'm going to leave it a little bit long so I can show you how to make a tendril out of it. You take anything round, pen or pencil, so on, and you're going to start here on the bottom, and you're going to just twist that around a couple times and make a little curly Q out of it. And then what you need to think about here is you want to make sure that that curly Q is not going to be stabbing this person all day as they are going through whatever special event is creating the need for a boutonniere, whether it's a wedding or it's prom or it's a special day like my dad's 80th birthday is coming up in a couple weeks. And so we tend to get a little bit closed-minded with boutonnieres and think they're only for weddings and dances when you're young. And that doesn't have to be the case. You know, it'd be great to make a little boutonniere for my dad on his 80th birthday and take it to him for him to be the man of honor that day. So here's my finished product. Things that I would tell my students to do in terms of quality control at this point would be to gauge the weight of this boutonniere that you made. How does it feel? Is it something that they're going to notice all day long? I would ask them to look at their taping. Their taping should be very smooth and tight all the way through. So for example, on the very tip of this, I have a wire that is still exposed, and that is a rookie move. We should not have that. So I'm going to pull my tape up and over that wire because we don't want the groom to poke himself with his boutonniere on his wedding day and suddenly have blood on his beautiful white shirt. So you have to think about your recipient, and that's why we appreciate those of you who support our program all year long. I always put 2 pins in. This is technically a corsage pin, but we do so few pin-on corsages anymore that I have a lot of these. And I like to give people a pin that will help them to get the job done. So that one's a little bigger. So I insert that into all this tape that we have down here now. Just a little bit. So again, no one's going to get poked. And I always give the person 2. Just in case, you know, we're nervous, we drop one, we lose it, we aren't scrambling, or they need 2 to actually hold it, put it on. I was saying we appreciate those of you who support us all year long because then we can practice things like this, and that helps our students to truly become designers. So there you have it. There's our final boutonniere. Let me show you a couple of other quick wiring and taping techniques, or I'm just going to show you wiring. Not every flower is a rose. So if you're using a flower like this, or this one, these are pom-pom-mums. See how they're a flat flower as opposed to our rose, which has this nice big receptacle to pin or put the wire into. So when you have a flat flower like that, you are going to make it a hook in your wire. You're just going to make a little tiny hook like this. How can I show you the hook? There it is. I've only left an inch of stem on, just like I did with the rose, to take the bulk out. And then you stab it right through the middle. And if it's your lucky day, it comes out directly in the stem. And if it's not your lucky day, it still works. You're going to pull that all the way through until that hook just disappears into the flower. It's just gone in the flower head. There's my wire coming out the bottom. And then I would go ahead and tape that. All right. So again, you've removed the bulk of the stem. And what I meant by manipulating the flower head is now, if I wanted to, I could turn that flower head at a 90-degree angle and face it out. So I was going to tell you some more modern techniques. And one of the most modern things I'm seeing, I don't even know if these florists are wiring and taping or if they're just doing this. They're just making a cluster of flowers. And then they leave all these stems so you can see them. They clean them up a little. They just tape them together at a central point, like just round. Just put your tape right around so it sticks to itself. And then they take a piece of ribbon and wrap that so that you're covering your mechanics. And they cut the bottom of the flowers. And this is a more natural looking boutonniere than having that green tape showing or even ribbon showing. And so it's just taped together, cover it with ribbon. Be sure if you're my student, you do cover it with ribbon. Don't stop too soon. We don't want to see your mechanics, so make sure you do a quality job. And so it just is exposed and shows the stems like that. So that's a little more modern technique that's taking place. Last thing, you can do a huge flower if you want to. You might have to use something more sturdy than a 26 gauge wire, which is what we've been using. The heavier your flower, the heavier your wire should be. And floral wire, just like every other wire I can think of, the gauges, the smaller the number, the thicker the wire. So the number is opposite the weight of the wire. Again, this is a flat flower, so I made my hook. And I'm going to go straight down the middle of it. Here comes my wire out the other side. I'm going to pull that right down into the center. And then I would just wire and tape. And then what this gives me the ability to do is when I put that on, I don't want the flower to be facing up. That looks odd, right? So the wire gives me the ability to bend it and face the flower outward from the person who's wearing it. So our wire is bent right there, right now. So some people really like this idea of a big flower, and you can use the same techniques. You can use the same techniques with small flowers. And I hope you've learned something new, or we've reinforced some skills. And I can't wait to see my students' beautiful boutonnieres. Thanks for joining me today.